The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spinoff or wherever you get your podcasts. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa, kei te whakarongo mai, koutou kia Gone By Lunchtime, ko Toby Manhire, tēnā kia ora, Annabelle Lee, kei te pēhea koe.
Kei te pai ahau, kei te pēhea koe.
Kei te pai, kia ora, Ben Thomas, kei te pēhea koe.
This being Māori language month?
Just
Week,
say
week?
Just say kei te pai.
There's a month, isn't there?
It's Mahuru Māori, that's this month.
I undertake to begin my 4th pass at Scotty Morrison's Māori Made Easy on my bedside table.
Just saying kei te pai right now would have sufficed, but that's good too.
I'm going to give everyone an insight into the back room working of the Gone By Lunchtime podcast. We have been exchanging emails and messages complaining about our flailing energy, wish to escape forever from the interminable election, haven't we?
We have. It's been hard. It's been a grind.
But then last night there was a poll. We're talking on Wednesday morning now. On Tuesday evening there was a paddy poll.
There was a paddy poll.
A Reed Research poll.
It was dramatic and devastating.
It was dramatic and devastating.
And
It kind of was. It kind of. I felt like it was a steroid shot, a bit of Lance Armstrong EPO in the last flagging lap of the Tour de France. Mm-hmm. Did you feel that way, Annabelle?
I did. When I saw the headline dramatic poll, I was like, oh, here we go. And then I read it and I was like, amazing.
We can read too much into it, can't we? It put National on almost 10 points ahead of Labour. According to those numbers, it had National able to pretty well govern without any.
The Greens were out, so 47.3 was enough.
Under 5. I mean, we can overstate it. We don't have that many polls to cling to, but all the same, it was like a shutdown of the trajectory, the narrative that New Zealand seemed to be swept up in.
Would I be a bit of a kill buzz if I said it felt a little bit roguey?
Bit roguey?
A little bit roguey.
Maybe the Colmar was a bit roguey. I mean,
there's 2 Colmars though that had the same trend. Yeah. And Reed Research had been following a similar trend until this one. Who knows? Maybe it's the $11 billion hole.
Yeah, like most people who have read 538.com, I too am a statistics expert, and what you always look at with the polls is the trend, and this is the first poll that has bucked the trend of National going down, Labour going up for quite a while. So that's going to obviously buoy National. The numbers don't seem right. They don't seem in accordance with what the parties are privately talking about in terms of their polling. They're not in line with the highly reputable Newsroom SSI poll, which had Labour with a 17-point gap over National. That one was a 100% online poll. But I don't think we would see this as a sort of huge tsunami-like change. But I think it indicates, it indicates that the tide of Jacinda mania may have started ebbing a little bit, which I think I can understand.
But if Tom Sainsbury being Paula Bennett was to comment, he would say that as we say in fashions, it's off trend.
Ladies and gentlemen, Annabelle Lee doing an impression of Tom Sainsbury, doing an impression of Paula Bennett.
Thank you.
You can see more Tom Sainsbury impressions and Kiwis of Snapchat on thespinoff.co.nz. The poll of polls that various people are running because they realise it's very expensive to run polls, and so we've just got polls of polls, and eventually we'll have no polls left at all, just polls of polls and polls of polls of polls. But the polls of polls, the latest versions, pretty well say that the two parties are neck and neck, don't they? I mean, it is going to be super tight in the next... What is it?
It's a drag race, Toby.
It's a drag race. The advance voting is now underway. We had almost 40,000 people on day one. The Electoral Commission have for a long time been saying they expect as many as half of voters to go to a booth before polling. Have you voted yet, Annabelle?
No, I'm old-fashioned. I like doing it on the Saturday. I like wandering in and there's the ladies wearing the rosettes and, you know, I like that buzz. I'm saving myself for election day.
Ben? You're an election day romantic, look at you. I can see.
I am. I like the suspense to build up, never quite knowing which box I'm going to tick.
I love that feeling of election day, you know, the kind of, that lag as well, even though I think the rules are a bit dumb and a bit sort of antiquated and insulting. I love that kind of pause, that like fallow period, and everything just feels like a, I don't know, I imagine that's what death feels like in a way.
Quite likely.
I imagine death feels like the last 2 weeks of this campaign. I think the early voting thing is interesting because this is going to be by far the highest early voting turnout if the Electoral Commission reaches what it says is its expectation, but also its target. Because I've spent a lot of time just in the past 2 days listening to Jacinda Ardern and Grant Robertson at various breakfast kind of meetings. You've been going to a lot of
breakfasts.
A lot of time that I would have rather have been in bed sleeping. I've been listening to the top two candidates in the Labour Party list. Top three. Right.
Do you actually get a breakfast when you go to those things?
ZB had these kind of toasted croissants with bacon and cheese and some other stuff, but
papaya. There's normally good papaya or melon offerings. Any melons?
They had sort of like cereal cups, you know, kind of muesli sort
like
of
a
cups.
birchery kind of.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Lots of coffee.
I like jam for a breakfast croissant myself. Right?
Yeah, the mood of the boardroom, as you'd expect for all the country's most important CEOs. That had a full breakfast. Squid ink served in a bowl.
And you had, the mood of the boardroom breakfast came off the back of the Herald's annual survey, in which all the business leaders too seemed swept up in Jacinda Mania.
They did, yeah.
And it seemed like, I didn't watch. I just was looking at the kind of, probably just reading your Twitter feed, Ben. That's all I need. And it felt as though Robertson had Joyce squirming. Was that true or not true? I mean, the fiscal hole stuff.
Well, I'm starting to doubt my own senses and the nature of reality this deep into the campaign. I had Bill English winning the stuff debate in Christchurch, which not a lot of people agreed with me on.
No one agreed with you, but the News Hub poll has vindicated you. And the News Hub poll has vindicated you.
I don't
That's
know.
just a fact. That's just a statistical fact. You can't have an opinion about a fact.
And look, there was a lot of reporting on the mood of the boardroom with Joyce doubling down on his fiscal hole claims, which drew a laugh from the business audience there. Yeah. So I don't think that that's a sort of credibility winner for National even now.
Right.
But overall, I thought Robertson, two things struck me. The first was that he very much othered the business audience. You know, he kept referring to you, and there was a clear division between us, the Labour Party, and you, the business community, which was quite reminiscent of Helen Clark, and wasn't even the same, I don't think, with a guy like Andrew Little, who actually had a lot more experience dealing with business from when he was a unionist. The second thing that struck me was just how little detail that Labour still have on their tax issue, on their tax working group, and how ad hoc the whole thing seems. So at that breakfast, Robertson said, you know, they wouldn't be going into any more detail, and he prefaced his answers by saying, "We've been very clear," which made me want to just kill myself at the table because of the number of times I've heard that over the last week or so. And then he said then he ruled out a change in the savings tax rate. So, investments in, pension funds, superannuation. So what we're seeing is all of these
and inheritance tax was ruled out that morning too.
Was ruled out that morning by Jacinda. So there's this ad hoc drip feeding, kind of slowly chipping away at this block of stone to eventually create the sort of Michelangelo's David of their tax policy. And it just seems ridiculous that they still maintain this fiction that they do, there's an empty canvas, blank canvas, an empty slate for them to write on, because there is all of this detail being revealed on the hoof. The other thing that came up was the industrial relations policy, which a lot of people in business are quite worried about as a return to collective bargaining. Robertson was at sea on that. He didn't have any satisfactory answers for Joyce, and I thought that was where Joyce seemed at his most commanding.
The tax thing is really interesting. The National Party have this morning launched a new ad where they've gone in hard. Let's tax this, and they've got a whole bunch of red arrows pointing at different things like water and cows' asses, and saying everything's gonna be tax. I guess my question about it is, or my puzzle about it is, why? Because Andrew Little had said, we will do the working group, we'll take it to the country at the next electorate when we go into our second term in government. And that kind of drew a line under it. Now, whether or not that was defensible, in sort of principled terms is arguable, I don't know. But Jacinda Ardern made a captain's call. She said when we did the Herald interviews with her in English, she said it was captain's call, and she discussed it with Grant Robertson. Basically, she'd made the decision. The memo didn't get to her deputy leader, even Kelvin Davis, who, almost 2 weeks later was telling News Hub that it would be taken to the country, any changes. So, but why do it at all? Wouldn't that have kind of wrapped it up in a pouch and chucked it into the...
What, to say that she won't do it until next election?
Yeah,
after.
because it's going to... these things take time anyway, don't they?
Because I think that she can see that there is a desire from some quarters for there to be changes in taxation, and I think that she perhaps knew that she had the luxury of being able to do it because of the goodwill around her and Jacinda mania, whereas Little was kind of crippled because he was so unpopular that he really couldn't risk to lose anything, which means that he couldn't do anything. But in terms of the water, what happened to the proposition of user pays, I wonder? It seems logical that there has to be some sort of taxation or levy for water use, and I'm just intrigued that when it comes to farmers, that they seem to expect a free ride in terms of cleaning up rivers, paying for water use, and yet everybody else seems to be on a user pays system for all other resources.
Well, that wasn't it. The polls on that suggest that people are behind that idea of that water tax as well. I mean, the National obviously has decided that it's just going to wrap them all up in one and say, count the taxes. And they've been given free rein to do that by Labour, because Labour won't commit to an actual tax plan. And it seems bizarre, you're talking about whether it was principled of Andrew Little to kind of kick it to the next election. But that's exactly what Helen Clark did, what John Key did, in terms of, Well, John Key didn't introduce GST without putting it to the country. Well, increased GST without...
In the campaign, he talked about, asset sales, and said that we won't sell any assets. If we decide we want to sell assets, we'll take that to the electorate and we'll let people vote on it. And look, you're right. I mean, they did make a reversal in the first term on GST. They increased GST. They said they wouldn't. And maybe that's the kind of minor betrayal you can make when you're in government. But it seems to be a different thing to actually campaign on ambiguity, which is what Labour are doing. And I think that's right. Initially, Jacinda had this huge reservoir of goodwill and sort of trust. But I think that's being steadily eroded, and you're seeing every interview is concentrating on this issue of where it is actually coming down now to sort of, it seems like evasiveness, I think. I mean, I have no doubt that if Labour doesn't draw a line under this, if the campaign went on for, I think, 2 more weeks, I'd put every dollar I owned on National winning. But I think that, I think that the sort of time left in the campaign means that, we're still running a very even race.
But it isn't, I mean, they could yet, if internal polling backs up even the vague direction of travel that you're seeing in Reid, would it be a political disaster to say, all right, we've listened, we've said, okay, we'll revert. Because in time terms, they wouldn't be able to introduce any new taxes until almost up to the next election anyway, because of the time it takes to assemble a working group, for the working group to do its working and its grouping, and then for the IRD to introduce the actual practical steps. We're pretty much in 2020 anyway, aren't we? And I speak as an expert here on tax and statistics, but
I think it would make her look weak if she would look wishy-washy and weak. I think if she was to back down on that now, and I dare say that it would end up, you'd see some movement back towards the Greens, which would probably be a good thing for them. But I think it would probably hurt her credibility more if she was to back down on that issue now. But you're right, we're seeing their tax policy sort of being developed on the campaign trail as they get chipped away at, and you see things like inheritance tax and that being ruled out. And
the other thing that I thought was interesting, Jack Tame on TVNZ, that nice young man,
Leighton Smith, Newstalk ZB. He says Jack Tame, or as I call him, Tame Jack.
What a haterade. Don't listen to the haterades, Jack. You're amazing.
Well, Leighton Smith is converted to Jacinda Mania as well. No. Judging on the last week, yeah. It was the opposite of damning with faint praise. He was sort of praising with faint damn.
He had an extensive monologue on the pace at which Jacinda speaks, which is not to... People who talk fast are not to be trusted. Newstalk ZB.
Did you hear his one about using pauses effectively?
Like that?
Yeah. I'm sure it was him. Maybe it was a comedy. No, it was him.
You were making a point. Sorry, Ben.
So Jack Tame interviewed Jacinda and put it to her. Well, she had said that her climate change goal, in terms of her climate change goal, would be the preserve of an independent commissioner who would look at things rigorously and with scientific evidence, and then would make a call that the government would adopt in terms of its goals for climate change. And then a week later, she came out and said, actually, carbon neutral by 2050, which may or may not, as per Toby's excellent piece on the Spinoff, have been an attempt to undercut the Greens and finally put them out of their misery. Or it may have just been more making things up on the hoof because that sounded better on the campaign trail. But what it showed is there's not a lot of thought is going into this. It's not as if they had this very strong principled position earlier that they were going to have a climate commissioner and they would set the target because that was better both morally and scientifically. What they have is just this carousel of policy ideas that sound good day to day, and I think I don't think it would hurt them to abandon them, just as it hasn't hurt them to abandon the Carbon Commissioner independent decision, to provide more clarity, because what we're seeing now is National are attacking them on these so-called taxes, and they're putting in the fart tax and the water tax, both of which are actually just hundreds of $1 million a year subsidies to the farming sector. Exactly. So National are now pretending that this phantom taxing Labour government is out to get ordinary New Zealanders, when actually a lot of the things that they're talking about are just removing massive subsidies to the agricultural sector, which National is kind of sort of enthralled to. Mm.
Let's talk about the Greens, since you mentioned them. 4.9% on the Reid new sub-poll last night, which by my calculations is not as high as 5%, which is what you required under the mixed member proportional system that we use in New Zealand to gain representation in Parliament without an electorate seat. There's been talks of deals, whether or not there could be a deal. It looks like Grant Robertson and Jacinda are doing a debt against Grant Robertson, doing a deal in Wellington Central for James Shaw. That's not a lot of other options out there. Are they... they could really miss out. It's difficult for the Greens because they're
up a polluted creek without a paddle, Toby, at present. It's not good.
They on one predictive model which is Patrick Leyland's, which is out this morning. He's got them going down to 2.5%, which is striking. But they haven't polled that low clearly. But there is this house bias in polling over recent elections, whereby they register lower on election day than they have done in the polls. So even from one point of view, it could be that 6% would be a worse result for them in the polls, because it might give people who were, carving away towards Jacinda Ardern's Labour licence to feel they could do that. I don't know. What are they going to do? What happens here? If you're sitting around in the Greens war room, how do you go? Do you go harder at Labour? Do you bring back Metiria? I mean, what do you do?
Metiria's trying to bring back herself.
Have you seen? She's around. She's got
She's campaigning hard in Te Taitonga. Yep, she's saying that she wants to be returned to Parliament and is making a play for the electorate vote. I actually think that's perhaps, with the benefit of hindsight, where the Greens have went wrong, is perhaps some more effort should have been made to shore up an electorate seat somewhere as a bit of a safety belt for them.
There's a huge majority to overcome in Te Taitonga where 2%, isn't it?
Yeah,
unless Metiria can have a very late-in-life whāngai arrangement in the Te Rakatani family, she has literally zero chance of winning Te Taitonga.
Yeah, I think she's actually polling third at the moment in Te Taitonga after the Māori Party's candidate, Mai Tāri, who is a very charming, lovely wahine, but those polls were also made before, those polls were conducted before, they were first started polling before Metiria had quit and Jacinda mania, so whether or not there's a bit of a sympathy vote out there for Metiria, I don't know. She might lift a little, but she definitely won't take it off anymore.
There's clearly some frustration in the Greens. It spilled over onto Twitter a bit this week in terms of the sense that Labour is stealing their thunder.
Stealing their thunder is a very sort of muted, euphemistic way of saying trying to destroy as a political party.
And clearly there are some people in Labour who are tempted by that idea, and the argument would be, in a medium to long-term sense, that if you can reduce Greens to a pile of organic ashes and then they turn into a Green Party that is purely environment focused and can swing either way in terms of party, that you then gain back the social policy support that you've lost to them in the past. That would I guess be the argument there for people who want to wipe them out.
Even in the short term, if National and Labour are about equal, both on around 40%, they'll get roughly half the Greens vote each. So it positionally, it doesn't disadvantage National. It doesn't disadvantage Labour in the attempt to get a New Zealand First coalition.
Yeah, right.
So if you accept that Labour's,
I'm sure they would rather have a Greens coalition though than a New Zealand First coalition, because if they preferred a New Zealand First coalition, they would have had a memorandum of understanding with them. I think
it was a different circumstance.
It's a lot easier for them to deal with the Greens than it would be for Winston and his endless bottom line. So it would certainly be better for Labour that the Greens remained and be a support partner for them rather than half their support getting divvied out to the Nats and them having to do a deal with New Zealand First.
I think that's broadly right. And at the same time, I think there are some people in Labour who would prefer New Zealand First thing, and that would be what was it 2005 all over again, where the Greens would be squeezed out. But the to your point, Ben, I don't buy that. A lot of people have been saying but if you've got the two drag race, the two parties would split it off. The difference between that and New Zealand First is that whereas the New Zealand First vote, as we've seen through polling, would split roughly either way. If they were doing a single transferable vote, their second would be. Whereas with the Greens, tell me how many of the people in that, if you had 4.9% Greens, how many of those people would choose National over Labour? And I would suggest to you 1 in 5 tops. So it's different in terms of it is for so yes, they would get roughly proportionally their bit of that vote, but for Labour, it also constitutes more of a loss than it would if, say, New Zealand First would have fallen under 5%.
Yeah, but remember, New Zealand First have talked very strongly about not wanting to be in government with the Greens in the past. I think Labour's clear preference in the Helen Clark years was to have a centre partner rather than a further left partner in coalition. And Jacinda Ardern, Grant Robertson were both prominent staffers during that time. That's where they learned their politics. It's clear from Labour's tactics that they are trying to drive the Greens under 5%.
That's my ride.
What's that? Is it a very loud vehicle outside?
Harley.
The
announcements about
coming to get us.
Talking about climate change, talking about swimmable rivers, like Labour has, that's clearly designed to choke oxygen, away from the Greens. And bring that back to Labour.
I mean, I was thinking about this yesterday. I mean, I feel like it's a bit less Machiavellian than that. Maybe I'm sure there are some in there that I think that, but I feel like it's. I put this line into a piece. I think Duncan might have taken it out. He tried to replace it with a reference to Gilda Kirkpatrick, which I overruled because I didn't understand the line. This is a kind of high-level editorial. Oh, there's Gareth Morgan again. But I thought it was like, that scene in Mad Men where there's that little copywriter who comes up and talks into Don Draper's ear in the elevator and and he goes, and I'm thinking about it, and Don Draper looks at him and goes, I don't think about you at all. And it's a bit like that, I think, for it's really, it's even worse than being loathed, is to be ignored, and I feel as though that's what they're just like, oh yeah, memorandum of understanding, whatever, we are just going now. We're just not even looking at you, We're just not even looking. And for the Greens, like, we signed this memorandum of understanding, we're friends, we went to campaign together, what's going on? And they're like, we'll get to that in a minute. That seems to me
we
a vibe.
had an organic potluck dinner together and, yeah.
Yep, we had friendship bracelets and everything.
Everything. Hemp ones.
We talked about Te Reo Tonga and polling, Māori seats, on the basis of those polls, which have been their read for
their read research
Māori
as
TV.
well for Māori TV, yeah.
And they give that on that basis we'd have 2 Māori Party electorate MPs, doing better than Willie Jackson would have had us believe a month or 2 back.
So in Te Tai Hauauru, Howie Tamati is ahead. Although I would mention that when we polled with Read Research in the last election, Chris McKenzie, who was the Māori Party's superb candidate in Te Tai Hauauru, was also polling above Adrian Rurafi, and Adrian lifted on the day. So I'm sure Adrian's camp will be hoping that he can turn that around again. The thing that's difficult about polling the Māori seats is that it takes a long time to do to meet your sample size. And that means that quite often the political landscape has changed quite a lot since the research began. So, for example, they released Waiariki the other night, and my understanding is that the research was conducted between July and September, and as we know, it's a whole different world now. It had Te Ururoa ahead. I think he's on about 60 and Tamati on 39 sort of thing. So whether or not those polls are reflecting Jacinda mania, I think it's probably safe to say that they don't, but they are still probably indicative of the trends that are happening within the Māori seats. And
I mean, if that were to bear out, in a weird way, it could put Marama Fox,
bad news for Marama,
who is number 1 on the list, at risk, because if they end up on 1.3 or 1.4, you need to get up towards 2 in the party vote, which, despite what some television personalities would have you think, can be voted for by anyone in the country, not just those in Māori seats, but Marama Fox could miss out.
Very likely to miss out if they win both those electorate seats. she's more than likely gone, because how much party vote would you need with 2 electorate seats? You'd have to be above 2%.
I think it's about 2. It'd be about 2.
Yeah, so she's in grave danger at the moment.
What about Te Tai Tokerau?
That hasn't been released yet, but
that's been, because that's going to be interesting, isn't it? I mean, things have obviously changed a lot around there, but we haven't seen an awful lot of Hone Harawira, the mana movement leader, who is the kind of sole. He's now the sole mana candidate.
Yeah. 25% of the list.
It's literally
because
the
of
sole.
the deal that was done, apart from the list. I mean, not presumably.
Which is only 4 people.
Is it only 4 people? Right.
Retrospect is a wonderful thing, and at the time that the deal was done, it seemed very, very smart, because there was only 700 in it between him and Kelvin at the last election. But when you look now, it seems almost disastrous for Hone not to write him out of the game, and he can run a very effective, 2 for the price of 1 campaign in the north. But I think the opportunity to potentially vote for the next Māori Deputy Prime Minister and have them as your electorate MP will be, very enticing for a lot of voters there. And I wonder now if perhaps instead of keeping mana separate from the Māori Party, if maybe Hone should have just teamed up with them, because, I mean, he won't even discount going into coalition with National now. So what's the point of being separate if you're not really that separate? And he may have been better served to have joined back up with the Māori Party and try and bring together the Mana Party vote with the Māori Party vote, because Mana did quite well last time. They polled higher than National. I realise that internet was a part of the mix, but I still think that probably most of it was those staunch Mana supporters. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. The other thing that's interesting, I don't know if you guys saw, but Māori TV also released their poll for Hauraki Waikato, which had Nanaia almost 4 times the support of Rahui.
So much for the Māori King influence, huh?
Well, yeah, I'm sure that he is, of course, it goes without saying, he's absolutely influential within the kingitanga, but Hauraki Waikato is much more than the kingitanga. It takes in places like Papakura, and, what might be good for Tuheitia and Rahui Pōkeka isn't necessarily good for Pānia and Papakura. So I think that, they'll be disappointed with that result, I would imagine, and Nanaia will be very pleased. And again, it probably doesn't it probably doesn't reflect the full scale of the Jacinda effect in the Māori seats. So I'm sure it probably won't be that much on the day, but you'd be pretty pleased if you were Nanaia.
Yeah, I think it was always a bit questionable, the idea of taking Waikato Hauraki off. I mean, that was never really in play. That's about as safe as the South Island, really. And but yeah, I interesting going back what seems a million years to the extremely well moderated Spinoff debate. Last week,
which we're going to put up, by the way, as a podcast, a Gone By Lunchtime special, if that's okay with you guys. If you don't feel like that's kind of territorially unclear. Is it right? I think we're going to post that as a podcast separately on the thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
you were saying?
Well, Kelvin got into a lot of trouble there, talking about the difficulties he had as both the deputy leader of Labour and having, what is a very big electorate, Te Tai Tokerau, and getting around that, attending to all of his constituent duties while also being the deputy leader. And Paula Bennett sort of roasted him about, how did he intend to be deputy prime minister? I mean, I think we should probably pause and say I think the chances of Kelvin being deputy prime minister are pretty low, because I think that will probably go to Winston Peters or in a very off chance James Shaw rather than Kelvin. But at the same time, there did seem to be a little bit of lack of fire in terms of wanting to keep both roles. It was an interest. I don't think it was an error on his part to answer the question about a mistake by saying that the job was too big. And I mean, he was very good on corrections.
Like, it is hard when you're doing those Māori electorates are huge, and it's hard to be on a national campaign as well as your own. And I think, that's where Marama and Te Ururoa have been quite smart in the way they've managed their campaign, because Te Ururoa's been basically invisible on the national stage. He hasn't fronted up for anything. Marama's been doing everything, she's been fronting all of the debates, and Te Ururoa
and she's
has
constantly
been able...
impressive. She kind of fills the room.
She fills the room, and Te Ururoa is at home in Waiareke just working that, knocking on doors and doing all of that stuff, which is a smart strategy for them because they need that seat, The other thing that's sort of interesting is that in some ways the Jacinda effect could potentially hurt Tamati Coffey and his chances down there of taking that seat, because now Te Ururoa's in a position to run a very effective two MPs for the price of one campaign. So, and I believe he's doing so.
And as well, if we go back to, again, what seems a million years ago, that TV1 poll shows that Labour plus the Greens plus the Māori Party is actually another path to power. If you skirt New Zealand first. Yep. So the Māori Party is actually now a legitimate. I think it should be a legitimate partner and option for the Labour government.
For each side. About that, though, is that, the Māori Party has spent the last 9 years really putting the boot effectively into the Labour's MPs. And at the end of the day, when coalition deals are done, there's numbers and all of that stuff, but there's also personalities and feelings and hurty-burnies and all of that sort of stuff. And I dare say that on behalf that within the Māori Labour caucus, there will probably be more of a desire to go with New Zealand first than perhaps the Māori Party. I'm sure at the end of the day they'll be mates with whoever they have to be mates with to be in government.
Certainly, it seemed pretty visceral between Calvin and Marama Fox particularly Marama Fox towards Calvin. I mean, there is some raw shit there, right?
Well, I mean, it goes both ways. I mean, Labour has spent a lot of, under Andrew Little, they were saying the Māori Party is not a kaupapa Māori Party.
That's right.
And that all goes back to its formation, Forshaw and Seabed, Clark and Turia. But
yeah.
Oh, look, we've run out of steam. We're just going to stop this. We're going to stop this. We're going to stop this. We're going to go and have a nap. We're going to go and have a nap for a while, and we're going to come back, re-energize. Well, you want to talk about
Simon O'Connor?
Really quickly,
yes.
Let's talk about Simon O'Connor. Decided it would be fun to post on website the Facebook that Jacinda Ardern is concerned about youth suicide, and yet she supports euthanasia, and that was a really dire act of hypocrisy on her part. What's going on there, really? That's my question.
I think one part of it, this doesn't relate to O'Connor himself because he's a lifelong National Party Conservative guy, but it does point towards something we might see a bit more of, which is with the kind of collapse of the Christian and then Conservative parties outside Parliament. We are actually seeing a lot more of the sort of traditional Conservative Christian right coming into the National Party, which people will have different views on, because that kind of faction has not found sort of parliamentary representation anywhere else. A lot of the new national candidates, when I say a lot, sort of handful, are on that more sort of very socially conservative side than we would normally think. I'm thinking like Christopher Penk in Helensville, Simeon Brown in Pakuranga, who are actually replacing quite liberal.
Was he the one you told us about before we started? Words you can't repeat on the podcast.
I think we can repeat it, can't we?
No.
And the second thing that I think that the O'Connor comments show is a bit of a breakdown in discipline in national. Now that with the campaign getting much more choppy, much more even than I think was expected sort of 2 months ago, certainly. You see people going off on their own a bit more like that. That's the sort of thing that Yeah. You know, I mean,
using their inside voices on the outside of Facebook.
You know, candidates get these lines from HQ and from their campaign teams that they're meant to run about the opposition, and they don't include saying that Jacinda wants old people to kill themselves. And so I think it does show, you know, certainly the beginnings of panic in the ranks.
Absolutely. Firstly, it's richly ironic given that was a policy introduced by National's own coalition partner Act in terms of the whole dying with dignity kaupapa. And secondly, to mix up those two issues is such a horrendous misstep at best. I thought Barry Soper said it best when he said, you know, there's supposed to be discipline, but they're behaving like they're desperate, and I think that sums it up perfectly. A really bad misstep on his behalf, and I'm sure there would have been some strong words from Uncle Bill.
It's great that the final word in this podcast can go to Barry Soper. Newstalk ZB. Check out our policy tool on the Spinoff, looking at policies, if you like policies, because they're good. Thank you to Mad Chapman, who's been on the mixing desk today. Thanks, Mad. And thanks, catch you in a week. Ngā mihi nui.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.